Larina Warnock is a neurodivergent writer with a disability who lives in Southern Oregon with her husband, 3 dogs, and a turtle older than she is. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Metastellar, Abyss and Apex, Stories We Tell After Midnight, Volume 2, Space and Time Magazine, and others. Larina, it's yours.
Hello. We're starting outside Billy's apartment, in the garden his mother won't let him eat from. He's getting a bruise between his eyes because of an accident involving his father's wedding ring, a ring left behind, still attached to his father's finger.
Huh?
Billy walked into the street without looking. Halfway across, he turned around, came back to the garden. He looked up at his mother's window, plucked a carrot from the ground, popped it in his mouth, and just missed a beat-up sedan as he jolted himself from the sidewalk to the road. Billy walked with the dirty carrot in his mouth like a cigarette just brought from a full ashtray. The greens at the end, limp and dangling, bearded his chin. He stopped at the bus stop on 4th and J, where 2 teenagers stood staring at traffic. Billy stared at Teen 1 and Teen 2. "You sure 4:30?" Teen 1 said. "Course I'm sure," replied 2. "Think they taught me nothing in 10th grade? Think I can't read a bus schedule?" They noticed Billy. Teen 1 looked him up and down. "Think this guy can read a bus schedule?" He laughed and guzzled the last half of his cherry soda. "They cut me open," Billy told them. "That's so," said Teen 2. "They spread out my skin and pinned it to a rubber mat and looked inside my chest and stomach." They gawked at him. The bus pulled up to the curb. "You're a friggin' freak," 2 told Billy, hoisting his backpack over one shoulder and climbing the stairs of the bus. "Total freak," 1 agreed, tossing a soda bottle toward Billy and following his friend. The bottle shattered on the sidewalk. Billy looked at it, looked at the bus driving away, looked at the glass. He put the carrot back in his mouth and walked across it. He walked to the community college, where he'd been a student a year ago. He sat down in a chair outside Dr. Otell's office. He'd been Billy's advisor when Billy thought he wanted to be a biologist. Dr. Otell wouldn't have known Billy was there if he hadn't looked up and seen blood pooling in front of his door. The teacher gawked at his former student, rushed for the first aid kit he kept in the lab, came back, and gawked a moment longer. Billy just sat there with blood-smeared feet, one hand held out as though blessing some unseen entity, and an unwashed carrot with drooping leaves hanging from his mouth. Dr. Otell waved his hands back and forth in front of Billy's face. "Billy?" he said. Billy looked up at his chosen mentor and grinned. "They cut me open," he said. Dr. Otell looked at Billy's foot. "I think you stepped on something." Billy shook his head. "They cut me open. They peeled back my skin and pinned it to a rubber mat." The words were muffled around the carrot, but Dr. Otell understood enough. He went into his office, called 911. He told them he had a suicidal student bleeding to death in his hallway. When the EMTs arrived, they gave Dr. Otell a long lecture about what constitutes an emergency. An educated man, they said, should know the difference. Dr. Otell didn't reply. He just stood across the hall watching them bandage Billy's foot and waited for the moment of epiphany. "What's your name, son?" The eldest and probably most experienced EMT asked the youngest of the group, as the youngest of the group wrapped huge swaths of gauze over and under and over again. "Billy, what's your last name?" "They cut me open." Mr. Experience started, looked at Billy, then at Dr. Otell, and then back at Billy. "Who cut you open?" Billy grinned. "They didn't find what they were looking for." Mr. Inexperience taped up the gauze and walked as fast as he could to the ambulance with a mumbled crackhead. "I'd like you to come with me," Experience said as he reached for Billy's elbow, "to see someone who can help." Billy felt the pressure but didn't stand up. "It's okay," he told the older man. "They didn't find what they were looking for." The EMT argued, "Son, if somebody's hurt you..." His voice trailed off as he noticed the faint spread of a bruise across Billy's forehead. A pale white dot remained between Billy's eyes. Nobody hurt me. They were just looking. Mr. Experience motioned to the driver to call the other transporters, the ones with white coats. He asked Dr. Attell for some information, but all Dr. Attell could say was, he wanted to be a biologist. Billy met the other guys, the ones in the white coats, at the sliding door of their white van. He knew who they were and where they would take them, and he knew they'd listen to him even if they didn't believe him. Mr. Experience told the specialist what Billy had said and what Dr. Attell had said, and they just nodded and told him they weren't shrinks, just the transport. The van drove between two iron gates toward a huge white building. "I've been here before," Billy told the driver. "Really?" the driver said, a question without the question mark. "They cut me open." The driver sped up. "They don't do surgery here, kid." "But they didn't find what they were looking for," Billy smirked. "That's, nice," replied the driver as he pressed on the brake. His coworker opened the door and leapt out before the van came to a complete stop. Little man with beady eyes stood in front of the double-door entrance to the hospital. Easier to call it a hospital than what it really was. Billy limped to him. "Hi," he said. "Hello, Billy," the little man replied. "They cut me open." "What were they looking for this time?" Billy's lip twitched in a half grin. "My soul." "Did they find it?" he asked. They climbed the stairs side by side. Billy shook his head. "That's good, Billy," the little man assured him. "Yes," Billy agreed. "Yes, it's good." The little man put his hand on Billy's elbow and steered him into his office, closed the door. Billy walked to the center of the room. "It's good they didn't find your soul," the man said, as he stood in front of him. Billy nodded. "Means you still have one, and that's good." He was trying to be convincing. He only convinced himself. Billy smiled, reached out his hand, and placed it on the man's head. "Means I never had one, and that's real good," Billy replied. And then he started to squeeze. When the orderlies heard the scream, they burst through the door, rushed Billy, tumbled over him, trying to restrain him. The little man tumbled over with them, and a snap echoed through the white room as his neck twisted against the tile. Billy lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, his arms flung out, one hand across the doctor's. He lifted one finger at a time, counting their similarities. 1, 2, 3, he whispered. 3 fingers and a thumb. He closed his eyes, let the black of his eyelids overwhelm him. He envisioned the little girl from 4D, wide eyes and curiosity, an innocence he might have known if they hadn't cut him open. Thank you very much, and I will be giving away a poem written from your prompt, so please do sign up for the giveaways tonight.